The hands on the clock in my living room read almost 6 p.m. when I finished folding the laundry. Friday. My ritual of cleaning up after the work week hadn't changed in years. My name is Vivian Holbrook. I'm 67 years old, and I've spent most of my life doing bookkeeping for Axiom Technologies in Foster City. My apartment, a two-bedroom, third-floor unit in an old building overlooking the bay, has been my sanctuary for the past 25 years. It's where I've lived most of my adult life, first with my husband Hugh, then alone with my son Bryce, and in recent years, alone. Nothing luxurious, but it was enough for me. A bright kitchen with faded curtains, a cozy living room with a chair by the window where I liked to read, and a bedroom where I kept photos of my past life. I neatly folded the last stack of towels and put the basket in the closet. My joints have been aching more lately, especially on evenings when the weather has changed. Foster City, with its sea-humid air, was not sparing my old bones. The phone vibrated on the kitchen table, a message from my son. Bryce rarely called for nothing. He usually needed something. I'd long ago stopped kidding myself about that, though. I remembered him as a little boy, hugging me when I came home from work. Back then, after Hugh died, it was hard for us. I worked 2 jobs so Bryce wouldn't feel left out. My husband left suddenly. A heart attack at age 35 left us no time to say goodbye. Bryce was barely 9 at the time. I might stop by on Sunday. Nicole wants to discuss something. The message read, "No greetings. No, how are you, Mom? Just information." I replied that I'd expect them for lunch. Nicole is his wife, a woman with ambition beyond her abilities. They met 10 years ago at some corporate party. Bryce had just gotten a job at Axiom Technologies as a junior analyst. I helped him land the job by asking my boss and friend Eugene Quincy to look at my son's resume. Eugene? My heart sank at the thought of him. A month ago, we were discussing the company's plans over a cup of tea in his office, and now he was gone. A stroke had taken him as suddenly as a heart attack had once taken Hugh. I went to the window. The evening sun was coloring the bay orange. At times like this, I felt the loneliness especially keenly. My world had narrowed to this apartment, work, and the occasional visits from my son, who seemed more ashamed of me with each passing year. I remember the day he brought Nicole to our house for the first time. She clearly didn't like my humble surroundings. She glanced at the worn couch and the old TV, and I saw her perfectly painted lips quiver. Bryce shifted awkwardly from foot to foot then and quickly pulled her away, citing some plans. "Mom, why are you still living like we're still on the brink of survival?" he asked me later. "You could have bought something newer a long time ago that doesn't scream poverty." Poverty. To Bryce, my lifestyle had always been associated with that word. He didn't realize that I just didn't see the point in changing things that were still serving me well. I wasn't poor. I had savings that I'd been saving for years, denying myself many things. I wanted Bryce to have the best education possible, to know no hardship like I had known growing up with a single mom in Minnesota. Eugene understood me. We had been friends for almost 30 years. He came to Axiom Technologies as an ambitious young financier, and I was already working there as an accountant. He had gradually risen to the position of CEO and majority owner, but he never forgot who had helped him make sense of the company's confusing accounting in those early months. "Vivian, you're the only person I trust completely," he told me more than once. I sighed and stepped away from the window. On the table was an envelope of papers from Eugene's attorney. I still couldn't believe the reality of what had happened. After Eugene's death, it turned out that he had left me not only a substantial amount of money, but also his controlling interest in the company. "To my faithful colleague and only friend who never betrayed," was what his will said. When the attorney informed me of this 2 weeks ago, I cried right there in his office. It wasn't just an inheritance, it was a confession. Eugene, who had no family, had decided to entrust his life's work to me, a simple accountant. The following Monday, the board of directors would meet to formally introduce me as the new majority shareholder and chairman of Axiom Technologies. I hadn't yet decided what I was going to do with this unexpected power. Part of me wanted to just sell the shares and retire, but another part of me, the other part, remembered all the times my ideas had been ignored simply because I was just an accountant. I hadn't told Bryce about the inheritance. At first, I wanted to wait until I was officially entitled, and then something stopped me. Perhaps it was the bitterness of realizing that the only person who had truly appreciated me all these years wasn't my blood and flesh, but just a colleague who had become a friend. Sunday came faster than I expected. I made lunch, baked chicken and potatoes and apple pie for dessert. Bryce loved my baked goods, though he'd never admit it. They arrived a half hour late. Bryce looked stressed. Nicole looked impatient. She immediately started talking about the new house they'd seen in an upscale neighborhood. It's got an amazing floor plan and a pool in the backyard, she chirped, barely saying hello. Of course, we'll have to take out a loan, but it'll be worth it. I nodded, pouring soup onto plates. Bryce was barely participating in the conversation, checking something on his phone. Mom, this soup is too easy, he said suddenly, pushing his plate away. Nicole had recently learned how to make asparagus cream soup, and that was truly exquisite. Nicole smiled smugly, and I remained silent. Such comments used to hurt me, but now I've learned not to react. How are things going at work? I asked, changing the subject. Fine, Bryce shrugged. Rumor had it that the company was going to change after old Quincy died. Hopefully the new director will be one of our own. I've applied for a promotion to department head. I almost choked. Bryce had never mentioned that ambition. That's great, I said, trying to sound sincere. When will you know the results? They should be announced next week, he said. What about you? Still checking the numbers columns all day long? There was a disdain in his voice that he didn't even try to hide. For Bryce, my job had always been something to be ashamed of, even though it had given him his education and everything he had. Yeah, it's the same, I answered calmly. Nicole suddenly perked up. Bryce, tell your mom about our idea. My son put the phone away and looked at me appraisingly. Minus Mom, Nicole and I have decided to go on a cruise. There's a great deal. 2 weeks in the Mediterranean. The perfect chance to relax before my promotion. I smiled. That sounds wonderful. I'm happy for you. But there's one problem, Bryce continued, and I already knew where he was going with this. We need a down payment within 3 days, and our main savings are currently invested in renovations. We thought you could help, Nicole said. It's a great investment in our vacation. An investment, like I'll get any dividends from their 2-week cruise. How much do you need? I asked, feeling tired of this conversation. Bryce named an amount that was almost a third of my savings. I almost laughed at the absurdity of the situation. That's a lot of money, Bryce. Yeah, for you, he shrugged. But we'll pay it back, when we can. He said the last 2 words so quietly that I could barely hear them. Mom, Nicole interjected with fake concern in her voice, we know you're always putting things off. And what do you spend that money on? Living in that old apartment, wearing the same clothes for years. You need to learn to enjoy life. I looked at both of them, so young, so confident in their right to demand. They were sitting in my living room, eating the lunch I had prepared, and yet they were looking at me with poorly concealed disdain. Before, I would have just given them money to see my son smile. But something changed in me after Eugene's death. Maybe it was the realization that life was too short for such a one-sided relationship. I need to think about it, I said. Bryce's face darkened. What's there to think about? It's not like it's that much money. It's a lot of money to me, Bryce. Jesus, Mom. He raised his voice. All your life you talk about money like every dime is a matter of life and death. It's time to stop living in the past. It's been 30 years since Dad died. His words hurt more than he could have imagined. I stood up silently and went to the bedroom where I kept my savings in the dresser. It wasn't all my money. Some of it was in my bank account, but it was enough to satisfy their request. When I returned with the envelope, Bryce and Nicole were whispering on the couch. They stopped talking when they saw me. Here, I held out the envelope. It's even a little more than you asked for, just in case. Bryce took the envelope without looking me in the eye. Nicole, however, brightened. Thank you, Vivian. I told you Mom wouldn't let you down, she said to her husband. Yeah, she would, Bryce mumbled, counting the money. She could give us more, though, considering how seldom we asked for it. I felt something inside of me finally snap. Bryce, I gave you almost a third of my savings. And what? He looked at me defiantly. Wayne, you're poor. You have nothing but pennies. With your job, what could you have saved? If you'd taken a risk once in your life, maybe you'd have a decent life now. Nicole put her hand on his shoulder as if trying to reassure him, but I could see in her eyes that she agreed with every word he said. I looked at my son, a grown man, whom I raised alone, denying myself everything so that he could study in a good school, go to sports, and then get an education at a prestigious university. And all this thanks to my miserable job as an accountant. You should go, I said quietly. I have to get up early tomorrow. Sure. Bryce stood up, tucking the envelope into the inside pocket of his jacket. Come on, Nicole. We've wasted too much time here already. They left without a proper goodbye, and I was left alone amidst the dirty plates and uneaten lunch. I slowly began to clear the table, mechanically performing the usual actions. Only when everything was clean did I let myself sit down and think about what had happened. About Bryce's words, about the money I'd given, knowing I'd probably never see it again, and about the decision that had matured inside of me finally. On Monday, I will become chairman of the board of the company my son works for. He doesn't know that, and he doesn't have to find out yet. First, I have to figure out if Bryce deserves the promotion he's looking for. And then I'll show him what real power means, not the kind that comes with money or status, but the kind that comes from respecting yourself and your work. I looked at the picture of Hugh standing on the shelf. I'm sorry, love, I thought. It seems I have failed in raising our son, but it's not too late to teach him a lesson. With that thought, I went to bed. I had a big day tomorrow, and I wanted to face it with a clear head and a firm decision. Sunday morning was surprisingly sunny for Foster City. I woke up earlier than usual, around 7, when the first rays were already shining through the blinds. My sleep was restless, dreaming that I was late for an important meeting and then couldn't find the documents I needed. Such dreams often came to me in moments of stress. Bryce and Nicole's upcoming visit threw me out of my usual rut. The last time we'd seen each other was Christmas, and the conversation had ended in a fight. Bryce chided me for not wanting to sell my shabby apartment and move closer to them, to a nursing home. It's a modern place, Mom, not like your rundown place, he said at the time. I refused, and we parted coldly. More than 6 months have passed since then. We exchanged rare messages, birthday greetings, questions about health, and now this surprise visit. I made coffee and sat at the window with a cup, watching the city wake up. The bay sparkled in the sun, the silhouettes of yachts in the distance. Sometimes I thought about what it would be like to live without constant money, to be able to travel and afford expensive things. But then I remembered the people I worked with, rich but always dissatisfied with life, and realized that money does not solve the main problems. By 11 o'clock, I started to prepare dinner. I decided to make Bryce's favorite dish, baked chicken with herbs. When he was a kid, he'd always asked for more, eating it with both cheeks. Now he winked, calling my kitchen too plain. I pulled the best tablecloth out of the closet, a linen tablecloth with embroidered edges. Hugh's mother had given it to me for our wedding. So that your house will always be full of guests and joy, she'd said then. I wonder what she would say now, seeing the way her grandson treats me. As I set the table, I noticed my hands were shaking slightly. Why am I so nervous about meeting my own son? When did it start? Maybe when he went to university and became ashamed of his background? Or when Nicole showed up with her way of looking at me like I was a museum piece? The doorbell rang at 2:30. I quickly took off my apron and went to open it. Bryce stood on the doorstep in an expensive suit, too formal for a Sunday visit to his mother's house. Nicole loomed behind him in an elegant light blue dress and a new haircut. "Hi, Mom." Bryce kissed my cheek. He smelled like expensive cologne. "Hello, darling." "Hello, Nicole." I stepped aside to let them inside. "Vivian," Nicole nodded, looking around the apartment. "Oh, did you change the curtains? It looks nice. Actually, the curtains were the same as they had been 5 years ago, but I didn't comment on that." "Come in. Dinner's almost ready. I made baked chicken." "Not with potatoes like usual, I hope?" Bryce asked, walking into the living room. Nicole has a starch intolerance. Since when? I wanted to ask. The last time she'd had mashed potatoes, she'd eaten a lot of them. "No, with vegetables," I said. "Have a seat. I'll get some appetizers." When I returned with a plate of cheese slices, Bryce and Nicole were sitting on the couch, leaning over their smartphones. When they saw me, they quickly straightened up. "Anything interesting?" I asked, setting my plate on the coffee table. "Just looking at pictures of the cruise ship," Bryce said nonchalantly. "The Imperial Shine is the newest ship, just launched." Nicole had been dreaming of a cruise for a long time. "It's not just a cruise," Nicole chimed in. "It's a dream trip. 2 weeks in the Mediterranean, with stops in Monaco, Sardinia, Greece. They have amazing cabins with private balconies and a spa on board." "That sounds wonderful," I said, trying to show interest. "When do you plan to go?" Bryce and Nicole looked at each other. "Actually, that's what we wanted to talk about," Bryce began. "There's a great offer, a special price for early booking, but you have to pay in advance by Wednesday." "That's it. Let's get right to it." "Have a seat at the table," I said. "The chicken's ready." At lunch, Nicole talked nonstop about the cruise, describing every detail as enthusiastically as if she'd already been there. Bryce chimed in, occasionally throwing me studying glances. "Have you ever been on a cruise, Mom?" Nicole asked suddenly. "No, never." I shook my head. "When I was young, Hugh and I had planned a trip, but then he got sick, and it didn't work out. You see, Bryce," Nicole turned to her husband. "Vivian had dreamed of traveling, too." Bryce set aside his fork and knife. "Mom, Nicole and I were thinking, you could help us prepay for the cruise. It's a great opportunity, and we know you have savings." Just like that, blunt and unprepared. I felt a lump come up in my throat. "How much do you need?" Bryce named an amount that took my breath away. It was almost half of my savings that I'd been saving for years, denying myself a lot of things. "That's a lot of money, Bryce." "But not for you," he shrugged. "What are you doing with it?" "It's dead weight. At least it'll do some good." "A good cause?" I asked him again. "You mean your cruise?" "Mom, don't start." Bryce frowned. "We're asking for a reason. It's important to us. Besides, I'm waiting for a promotion at work, and then I'll pay it all back with interest." "Yes, Vivian," Nicole encouraged him. "Think of it as an investment. Bryce will definitely get a promotion. He works so hard." I looked at my son. He had once been a little boy who had promised me that he would grow up and buy me a big house with a garden. Now he was a grown man who only saw me as a source of extra money. "Don't you have any savings of your own?" I asked. "Of course I do," Bryce replied irritably. "But we'd recently invested it in repairs. And Nicole's car needs to be replaced. And anyway, Mom, what's with the interrogation? I'm your son, not a bank customer. I just want to understand why you came to me instead of taking out a loan from the bank." Nicole laughed. "A loan? With those wild interest rates? Why, when you have a family, families are supposed to help each other, aren't they?" "Yes, they should," I agreed, "but the help is usually mutual." Bryce stood up abruptly from the table. "Okay, forget it. We'll find another way." "I didn't say no," I countered. "I just want to make sure it's temporary help, not—" "Not what?" Bryce interrupted me. "Not a handout for poor relatives? God, Mom, you've always been so stingy. All those years of saving, giving up a normal life, and for what? To sit on your savings like a dragon on gold? Bryce." Nicole put her hand on his shoulder. "Calm down, honey. Vivian's just worried, like any mother would be. But Bryce couldn't stop himself anymore. What kind of mother? She'd never been a real mother. Always work, work, work. Bryce, I can't make it to your school concert. I have a report due." "Bryce, let's postpone the trip. I have to finish my quarterly papers." All my life, those damn numbers had been more important than me. I froze, stunned by his words. Was this really how he perceived my past? I'd worked overtime to provide for us after Hugh died, to give my son everything he needed. Is that what he considers that to be? Neglect? "Bryce, I did the best I could," I said quietly. "It hasn't been easy for us since your father died." "The other single moms were getting by," he exclaimed. "Sean's friends always came to his games, even though his mother raised him alone. And you always had that important job." "That important job paid for your college," I reminded him, "and your first car, and helped with the down payment on your house." "Oh, of course. Now you're going to be saying that to me for the rest of your life." Nicole stepped between us. "Let's all just calm down. Vivian, we're just asking for help with the cruise. If you're uncomfortable, we understand. Right, Bryce?" But my son was already pacing the room like a caged animal. "No, Nicole, no more games. Mom's always like this, pretending to help and then making me feel guilty for every penny. Remember when she refused to help with the kitchen remodel? It's your house. You have to do it yourself." And it didn't cost her a dime to help. "Bryce, that remodel cost like a new car," I countered. "And you wanted marble countertops when you could have gone with something more practical." "Here," he pointed his finger at me triumphantly. "That's it. Always counting other people's money. Always talking about practicality. You know what? I'm sick of it. Nicole and I are building a normal life, not living in the past like you." I felt tears coming to my eyes, but I didn't let them come, not in front of them. "If that's what you think, maybe you should leave." "Fine." Bryce grabbed his jacket. "Let's go, Nicole. We don't need her money. I'll take out a loan." Nicole looked confused. "But Bryce, we were going to—" She paused, looking at his angry face. "No, Vivian's right," he said bitterly. "We're asking too much. After all, what does she have? A miserable job, a miserable apartment, a miserable savings. You're poor, Mom. You've got nothing but pennies." His words hit me like a slap. So much contempt, so much venom in my own son's voice. I looked at him and didn't recognize him. Where was the boy who used to hug me when I came home tired after work? "Bryce," Nicole took his hand. "Don't be like that. Vivian's just worried about the future." "What future?" He laughed bitterly. "At her age, what future? Sitting in front of the TV and waiting to die? Let her spend her money on something useful." I stared at them in silence, feeling a strange calm grow inside. It was as if I had finally seen the truth that I had long refused to recognize. Wait, I said, and went into the bedroom. In the bottom drawer of the dresser, under a stack of sweaters, was a box of cash, my rainy day savings. I pulled out a wad of bills and walked back into the living room. Bryce and Nicole stopped talking when they saw the money in my hands. Here, I held it out to my son. It's more than you asked for. Enough for the best cabin. Bryce hesitated, but Nicole carefully took the money from my hands. Thank you, Vivian. We really appreciate your help. Yeah, thanks, Bryce mumbled, not looking me in the eye. I'll pay you back when I get my promotion. Take your time, I said. Enjoy your vacation. When are you planning on going? Next weekend, Nicole answered, perking up. Right after they announce Bryce's promotion. It'll be our little vacation. Great, I smiled. Send me pictures from the vacation. They left shortly afterward, not even staying for dessert. Nicole, having gotten the money, immediately relaxed and started chatting about her travel plans. Bryce remained scowling but no longer yelling, probably embarrassed by his outburst. When the door closed behind them, I sank into the chair and covered my face with my hands. Only now I let the tears flow freely. I cried not so much out of resentment as out of frustration. How could I not see what my son had become? When had this process begun, this transformation from loving child to calculating egoist? After half an hour of crying, there was a strange relief. It was as if I'd finally shed the heavy weight I'd been dragging around for years, the weight of guilt and hope that one day Bryce would be the same again. I stood up and walked over to the window. The sun was already slipping toward sunset, coloring the bay in orange hues. Life went on, despite my shattered illusions. The phone rang on the table, a reminder of tomorrow's board meeting. Tomorrow, I will officially become chairman of the board of the company where my son works. He doesn't know about it. No one knows except Eugene's attorney and a few board members who have already been contacted by the attorney. Most of the employees, including Bryce, won't learn the news until tomorrow. I looked at Hugh's picture on the shelf. What would you do if you were me? I mentally asked him. Hugh had always been fair, but firm. He wouldn't let anyone, not even his own son, treat him like that. Suddenly, I realized I knew what to do next. Yes, I had given Bryce the money, but that would be the last time I let him use me. I now have power he doesn't even know he has, and I'm going to use that power to teach him a lesson that should have been taught a long time ago. I pulled out my laptop and opened the files Eugene's attorney had given me, the financial reports from all the departments for the past year. Bryce was heading up the warehouse optimization project, and I wanted to take a close look at his work before tomorrow's meeting. Within an hour, I'd already discovered the first discrepancies. The numbers didn't add up. Some expenses seemed unreasonably high. Could it have been just carelessness or something more serious? I continued to study the documents, making notes. My years of experience as an accountant allowed me to see things others might have missed. And the more I dug into the reports, the clearer it became that Bryce might not have been playing entirely fair. In the morning, I'd have full access to all of the company's records so I could verify my suspicions. If they were confirmed, well, Bryce would soon learn what it meant to truly disappoint a parent. I closed the laptop and took a deep breath. The decision had been made. No more favors, no more special treatment. If Bryce deserved a promotion, he would get it. If not, he would have to be held accountable for his actions, just like any other employee. You poor thing, you've got nothing but pennies. His words were still ringing in his ears. Well, he would soon learn how wrong he had been, and it would be the most important lesson of his life. Monday began with the shrill ringing of my alarm clock at 6:30 in the morning. I woke up instantly, even though I usually let myself linger in bed for a few more minutes. Today was no ordinary day. Today, my life was changing dramatically. I showered, carefully styled my hair, and pulled my best suit out of the closet. Dark blue, austere but elegant. I'd bought it 3 years ago on sale and wore it only on special occasions. Looking at myself in the mirror, I adjusted the pearl brooch on my lapel, a gift from Hugh for our 5th wedding anniversary. I wanted him to be invisibly present with me on the big day. At 7:30, a black car with a driver picked me up, a directive from Eugene's attorney. The new chairman of the board must arrive appropriately, he said, when I tried to object that I could take public transportation, as I had done for 30 years in a row. The Axiom Technologies office was located in a modern glass and concrete building in Foster City's downtown business district. I had walked through those doors so many times as a simple accountant, and today I arrived as a majority owner. I was greeted in the lobby by Edward Harris, the CFO and the second person in the company after Eugene. He was a tall, trim man in his 50s with early graying temples and a keen eye. "Good morning, Vivian." He extended his hand to shake. "I'm glad to welcome you in your new capacity." "Thank you, Edward." I shook his hand, trying to look more confident than I felt. "The board of directors will meet at 10, he continued. "In the meantime, I'll show you Eugene's office. I mean, your office." We took the elevator to the top floor. I didn't come here often, except when Eugene invited me to discuss some particularly complicated financial matter. The office looked as if Eugene had just left and was about to return. An immaculately clean desk, a leather chair, a wall of awards and photographs behind me. I spotted a picture of us together 10 years ago at a company picnic. Eugene was smiling, putting his arm around my shoulders. "To your best accountant and loyal friend," the caption at the bottom read. "We haven't touched anything," Edward said, noticing my attention to the photos. "We were waiting for your decision." "Thank you," I nodded. "Leave everything as it is, for now." Edward stepped away tactfully, leaving me to settle in. I walked slowly around the spacious office, running my hand over the shelves of books, looking at the paintings on the walls. Then I sat down in Eugene's chair, now my chair, and allowed myself a moment of weakness, closing my eyes and taking a deep breath. "What have you done, old friend?" I whispered. "I'm just an accountant, not a director." But there was no time for doubts. I turned on the computer and entered the password Eugene's attorney had given me. The system came to life, giving me access to all the company's files. The first thing I opened was the latest financial statements. Eugene always had his finger on the pulse of the company, and I wanted to get an overview of the current state of affairs. Axiom Technologies was a manufacturer of specialized software for logistics companies. The business was stable, with steady, though not explosive, growth. The company's main value was its intellectual property and reputation as a reliable partner. I delved into the reports of the department Bryce managed. He was in charge of implementing a new software module for large clients, a responsible and well-paid job. Yesterday's suspicions weren't unfounded. There were some strange discrepancies in the reports. The amounts billed to the clients for the implementation did not match the internal expenses of the department. The difference was not huge, but systematic. About 5 to 7% of each contract seemed to dissolve. To the untrained eye, it might look like a simple accounting error, but to me, who had worked with numbers all my life, the picture was obvious. The door to the office opened, and in came the secretary, a young woman with neatly bunched hair. "Mrs. Holbrook, the board members are meeting in the conference room." "Thank you." I closed the files and stood up. "I'll be right with you." The secretary nodded and walked out. I took a deep breath, adjusted my suit, and headed into the conference room. 8 pairs of eyes stared at me as I entered. The board of directors was made up of people I'd known for years, but rarely spoke to directly. To most of them, I was just the same accountant who had worked when the company was founded. Edward stood up and gestured for me to take the seat at the head of the table, Eugene's chair. Colleagues, he began. As you all know, according to Eugene Quincy's last will and testament, Vivian Holbrook has taken over control of the company. Today, she officially assumes the position of chairman of the board. A whisper ran through the room. I noticed different expressions on faces: surprise, skepticism, curiosity. No one seemed overtly displeased, but I sensed that not everyone was happy about this turn of events. Thank you, Edward. I nodded and turned to the crowd. I understand your surprise. I've been an accountant for this company for 30 years, and I didn't aspire to a management position. But Eugene thought otherwise, and I can't help but respect his last will and testament. I promise you that I will do everything I can to fulfill his trust and ensure a stable future for Axiom Technologies. The meeting lasted about 2 hours. We discussed current projects, financial indicators, and plans for the future. I listened more than talked, trying to get into all aspects of running the company. After the meeting, Edward lingered. How are you feeling in your new role? He asked. Strange, I answered honestly, like I was trying on someone else's shoes. But I'll get over it. I'm sure you will, he smiled. Eugene always said you were the most reliable person in the company. And if I may give you a word of advice, don't try to be another Eugene. You have your own way. Thank you, Edward. I appreciate your support. Back in my office, I continued to study the files. Now that I had full access to all the files, I could dig deeper. The story of Bryce's reports kept bugging me. By 4 o'clock, the picture started to become clearer. Bryce had been systematically overcharging clients for software implementations, and the difference seemed to be going to a bogus consulting firm called BN Solutions. I did a search on that company and found that it was registered just a year ago under the name of Nicole Holbrook, my sister-in-law. My heart sank with disappointment. My son hadn't just neglected me. He'd engaged in fraudulent behavior at the company that had given him a job through my recommendation. The phone vibrated, a message from Eleanor's friend. We'd met at an adult art class a few years ago and occasionally met for coffee. Vivian, did your son go on a cruise? Just saw the pictures on the internet. What gorgeous views. I thanked her for the information and opened up social media. I had an account that I rarely used, but Bryce and Nicole didn't know it. I wasn't listed among their friends. Nicole's profile appeared to be open for public viewing. Recent postings were full of photos from the Imperial Shine cruise ship. Here's her and Bryce on deck with glasses of champagne. Here's their luxurious stateroom with a separate living room and balcony. Here's dinner at a haute cuisine restaurant. Beginning our unforgettable voyage, 2 weeks of bliss ahead. Number living in one family number luxury vacation. The caption under the first photo read, I leafed through and through, feeling bitterness rise to my throat. In all the pictures, they looked carefree and happy, enjoying luxuries I'd never allowed myself. Luxury paid for with my savings, the very pennies that Bryce had laughed so scornfully at. In one of the photos, Nicole was showing off a new bracelet, a thin gold chain with diamonds. A little surprise from my favorite husband. Thank you, gift. Love demons, she wrote. I closed the page and leaned back in my chair, trying to deal with my emotions. So that's where some of my money had gone, on little surprises for Nicole while they pretended to be a successful couple on a luxury cruise. There was a knock on the door, and the secretary came in. Mrs. Holbrook, you have a visitor. Alan Price from the implementation department. I didn't remember the name right away, but then it came back to me. Alan worked in Bryce's department, one of the senior specialists. Send him in, I said, straightening in my chair. Alan was a middle-aged man with a tired face and a thin folder in his hands. He looked nervous. "Mrs. Holbrook," he began after we had exchanged greetings, "I wanted to talk to you in confidence. It concerns the work of the implementation department." "Have a seat, Mr. Price." I pointed to the chair opposite. "I'm listening." Alan opened a folder and took out some documents. "I've been with the company for 12 years, and I've always been proud of our quality standards and integrity, but in the last year, things have been happening that have been troubling me." He placed the documents on the table, printouts of reports very similar to the ones I'd studied earlier. Bryce Holbrook has been systematically inflating project budgets and diverting some of the funds to an outside company, Allen continued. "I tried to talk to him about it, but he threatened to fire me. He said that everything was coordinated with the management." "When did it start?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "About 10 months ago, when Mr. Quincy started coming into the office less often because of health problems. That's when Eugene suffered his first microstroke and began to step back and give more responsibilities to his deputies. I realize Bryce is your son," Alan added awkwardly, "and I hesitated for a long time before coming to you. But after I found out that you'd become chairman of the board, I thought you should know." "You did the right thing, Mr. Price," I nodded, keeping outwardly calm, though inside I was seething. "I appreciate your honesty, and I promise that this matter will be thoroughly investigated." After Alan left, I went back to studying the files with the new information. Now I knew what to look for, and the signs of Bryce's machinations became clearer. He was careful, but not cunning enough to fool an experienced accountant. By the end of the day, I had a complete picture. Over the past 10 months, Bryce had diverted about $100,000 to his wife's shell company, enough to be prosecuted if the company decided to go to the police. I closed the last file and glanced at the clock. It was almost 7 in the evening. It was already dark outside the window, and the office was empty. I was alone in the huge office, with a heavy load of new knowledge and decisions to make. I opened the social network again. Nicole had posted a new batch of photos. Now she and Bryce were enjoying the sunset on the deck of a liner sailing somewhere in the Mediterranean. Day 2 of our paradise vacation. 12 more days of bliss ahead. Hashtag cruise, hashtag luxury, hashtag worthy life. The caption read. I closed the page and wondered. Bryce would be back in 12 days, unaware that his mother was now his boss, and his machinations had been exposed. He'll be looking forward to his promotion he'd so smugly talked about. What should I do? As a mother, I could turn a blind eye to his misdeeds, protect him from the consequences. But as the head of the company Eugene had put his trust in, I had no right to let the fraud go unpunished. And one more thing, I no longer wanted to be the weak woman Bryce thought he could use and humiliate. His words, "You're poor, you've got nothing but pennies," were still ringing in my ears. I opened a new document on my computer and began to sketch out a plan of action. I had 12 days to prepare for Bryce's return. 12 days to develop a strategy that would teach him a lesson he would never forget. The first item I wrote was, order a full audit of the implementation department. This would give me official proof of Bryce's machinations, corroborated by independent experts. The second item was, meet with the legal department to discuss possible consequences. I needed to know all the options, from internal sanctions to criminal prosecution. Third, prepare a presentation to the board of directors. If I decided to act, it had to be completely transparent and official. I continued writing, adding bullet points and subpoints, creating a detailed action plan for the days ahead. With each line, I could feel my confidence returning. Yes, I'm just an accountant, but I'm also skilled in systems and processes. And now I was creating a system that would teach my son the most important lesson of his life, the lesson of responsibility and consequences. Once I finished the plan, I sent it to the printer and tucked it away in a folder. Tomorrow would be the beginning of a new phase of my life. The life of the chairman of the board of Axiom Technologies and a mother ready to finally stop victimizing her own child. I shut down my computer, grabbed my bag, and headed for the exit. The security guard on the first floor nodded respectfully at me. The news of my assignment had already spread throughout the company. "Good evening, Mrs. Holbrook," he said, opening the door in front of me. "Good evening," I replied, stepping out into the cool evening air of Foster City. At home, I made myself some tea and settled down in a chair by the window. For the first time in a long time, I felt a strange peacefulness. It was as if life, which had been on a steady course for a long time, had suddenly taken a new road, an uncharted but promising one. I didn't know how this thing with Bryce would end. Maybe he'd realize his mistakes and change. Maybe he wouldn't. But one thing I knew for sure was that I would no longer be the weak, easily manipulated mother he was used to seeing in me. That night, I made a decision that would change our lives forever, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. 2 weeks flew by. Every day, I arrived at the office at 8 a.m. and left at 7 p.m. at the earliest. During that time, I had time to familiarize myself with the company's basic business processes, hold individual meetings with department heads, and initiate a general audit, explaining that I wanted to get a complete picture of the state of affairs after Eugene's departure. No one protested explicitly. Some were puzzled by my questioning, but blamed it on the inexperience of the new manager. Edward Harris proved to be an invaluable ally. He patiently explained the intricacies of management that I could not have known as an accountant. The implementation department, which Bryce managed, was particularly scrutinized. I brought in outside auditors to rule out any accusations of bias. The experts confirmed my suspicions. Funds that should have been used to implement software for clients were flowing through a shell company called BN Solutions. This wasn't just inefficiency or accounting error, it was deliberate fraud. Bryce was using his official position to enrich himself at the company's expense. On the last day before he returned, I sat in my office reviewing the auditor's final report. Next to me was a folder with printouts of photos from social media. Bryce and Nicole in front of the Azure Sea, in expensive restaurants, shopping in boutiques. Each picture was a testament to their lavish lifestyle, fueled not only by my savings, but also by money stolen from the company. The phone on the desk rang. Mrs. Holbrook, came the secretary's voice. "Mr. Price is here to see you." Alan Price became my confidential informant in Bryce's department. It was he who provided the key documents confirming my son's frauds. "Send him in," I replied and closed the folder with the photos. Alan walked in as usual, folder in hand. During these 2 weeks, he had relaxed in my presence. He no longer stuttered and looked straight into my eyes. "Good morning, Mrs. Holbrook. I have news. Bryce is back." I tensed. "Is he in the office yet?" "No, but he sent a message to the team. He'll be at work tomorrow and wants to hold a department meeting at 10. Alan paused. He said he had great news and that everyone should be ready for a new phase in the life of the department. I hummed. Bryce was obviously confident about his impending promotion, probably plotting how he would run the expanded division without even realizing that his career was on the verge of collapse. "Thank you, Alan. Did you get the instructions from the auditors?" "Yes," he nodded. "They asked for additional documents on the Meridian project. I've prepared everything." He placed the folder on the desk. Meridian was the department's biggest project of the last year, a software implementation for a logistics company with branches all over the West Coast. That's where the most significant financial irregularities were. "Great." I picked up the folder. "We'll have the audit completed by the end of the week. In the meantime, don't tell Bryce about the audit. Let him think it's a company-wide routine. After Alan left, I stared out the window for a long time, thinking about my upcoming meeting with my son. How will he react when he learns that his mother now owns a controlling interest? What does she know about his machinations? Would he try to justify himself, or would he attack, as he usually did when he felt threatened? I got home late, but I couldn't sleep. I rolled around in bed, imagining different scenarios for tomorrow. In the end, I decided I wasn't going to rush to expose myself. Let Bryce face the results of the audit first, and then find out who was behind it. Wednesday morning started with a phone call. I was just finishing my coffee, getting ready to leave, when my cell phone rang. Bryce's name popped up on the screen. "Good morning, Bryce," I answered, trying to sound casual. "Hi, Mom." My son's voice sounded cheerful. "We got back yesterday. The cruise was amazing. Nicole loved it." "I'm glad to hear it," I said. "How was your trip?" "It was great. Listen, I was just calling to ask if you could come over tonight. We brought you some souvenirs, and we have a lot to tell you." I was surprised. Bryce wasn't usually eager to see me after he got back from his trips. "Sure, I'd love to. What time?" "How about 7 o'clock? Nicole's making dinner." As I hung up the phone, I wondered, something's not right here. Bryce is too happy, too nice. Maybe he's asking for more money? Or just in a good mood after a vacation? I got to the office by 8:30. The first thing I did was review the morning's reports and prepare for a meeting with the legal department. We were to discuss the possible consequences of the violations we'd discovered. I ran into Edward Harris in the hallway. "Good morning, Vivian. Have you heard the news? Bryce Holbrook is back from vacation, and he's walking around the office looking like he's about to be promoted to vice president." "Really?" I made a surprised face. I wondered who told him he was going to be promoted. "I have no idea," Edward shrugged. "But he's already hinted to a few of his coworkers that there's a big announcement coming. People are starting to whisper." I sighed. Bryce was always prone to wishful thinking. Well, we'll see how that plays out. By the way, the auditors are due to deliver their final report this afternoon. Will you be joining the discussion? "I will," Edward nodded. "This concerns all departments after all." Around 10, I got a text from Alan. Bryce called the meeting. He seems very confident. Said he had insider information on the personnel changes. Insider information? From where? I frowned. Promotions were decided by the board, and there hadn't been any discussion about Bryce yet. At noon, Alan sent another message. Bryce found out about the audit. Seems concerned. Requested all Meridian documents. So he's getting nervous. That's good. Let him get nervous before he finds out the truth. After lunch, I finally received the final audit report. The results were disappointing. In addition to direct financial fraud through BN Solutions, Bryce had systematically inflated project estimates, listed non-existent expenses, and even created a fictitious consultant position for which the company paid a salary. The money, of course, was going into a dummy account. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I called a meeting with the heads of the legal and finance departments. We discussed possible sanctions for employees found guilty of fraud. According to the company's internal rules, this is a direct ground for dismissal, said the head of the legal department. In addition, we can demand compensation for damages through the courts. "And criminal prosecution?" I asked. "Possibly, if the amount exceeds a certain threshold." In the case of Meridian, the threshold was clearly exceeded. I nodded, making notes. "Good. Please prepare all the necessary documents. I want to have a complete picture of possible actions by tomorrow." After the meeting, the secretary told me that Bryce Holbrook wanted to see me. "He says it's urgent," she added. I hesitated. I wasn't planning on seeing Bryce until tomorrow, when I had all the necessary paperwork. "Tell him I'm busy and won't be able to see him until tomorrow at 11. Not 5 minutes later, The phone on the desk rang again. Dash Mrs. Holbrook, Mr. Holbrook insists. He says it's about the audit and he can't wait. I sighed. Maybe it was for the best to see how he'd handle it, not knowing his mother was the new principal. Okay, send him in. Bryce appeared in the office doorway, tanned, wearing an expensive new suit. His face portrayed confidence, but knowing my son well, I could see the tension in the corners of his eyes. Good afternoon. I'm Bryce Holbrook, head of the implementation department. He introduced himself without recognizing me. I was sitting with my back to the window, and the sunlight was probably obscuring my features. I know, I answered without getting up. What can I do for you? Bryce took a step forward and froze. His eyes widened with shock. Mom! He looked like he'd seen a ghost. What are you doing here? Why are you sitting in the principal's office? I gestured for him to sit down. Because I am the new principal, Bryce. Actually, I'm the chairman of the board. Eugene Quincy left me a controlling interest in the company. Bryce sank into the chair, never taking his eyes off me. His self-assurance instantly evaporated. But how? When? 2 weeks ago? Right when you and Nicole went on the cruise. He was silent, clearly trying to make sense of the situation. Then his face changed from shock to something akin to calculation. Mom, this is amazing. Why didn't you tell me? We could have celebrated. I didn't smile back. You wanted to talk about the audit, Bryce. What exactly is it that's bothering you? He fidgeted in his chair. Well, I came back today and found out there was some kind of audit going on. Just wanted to make sure everything was okay. You know how important Project Meridian is to me. I know, I nodded. The auditors just delivered their final report today. Would you like to see it? I held out the folder to him, watching his reaction. Bryce took the documents with feigned nonchalance, but his fingers trembled slightly. Sure, though I'm sure everything is perfectly fine. He began to look through the report, and I watched his expression change gradually, from contrived confidence to anxiety to fear. There's a mistake here, he finally said, closing the folder. These numbers, they're not. I can explain. I'm listening, I said calmly. Bryce took a deep breath. You see, when you implement complex systems, there are always additional costs that are difficult to anticipate in advance. We've set up a contingency fund to cover these unexpected costs. It's a common practice. And this contingency fund happens to be registered in your wife's name? Bryce went pale. What? Number? I don't know what you're talking about. BN Solutions, I interrupted. Brody Nicole Solutions. Your wife is the sole founder of that company, and in the last year, about $100,000 of Meridian's budget has passed through it. He was silent, frantically thinking of what to say. It's not what you think, he finally said. Nicole did provide consulting services. She's a user interface specialist, you know. I know, I nodded. Except there was no user interface work at Meridian. This is a standard implementation with minimal customization. Bryce stood up, his face contorted. Okay, enough of this interrogation. What do you want me to say? That I sometimes optimize budgets? Everybody does it. Eugene knew about it and turned a blind eye because I was bringing the company good contracts. Eugene knew? I raised an eyebrow. Do you have proof? He stammered. No, we discussed it verbally. But he understood how business worked. Not everything could be done strictly by the book. I leaned back in my chair, studying my son. He lied to my face, even when caught red-handed. Not a shadow of remorse, only fear of being punished. I understand, I said finally. Well, Bryce, we'll revisit this conversation tomorrow when I have the paperwork from the legal department. Legal? He tensed up. Why bring in the lawyers? Mom, this is an internal company matter. An embezzlement of corporate funds is a felony. I said calmly. Bryce turned even paler. You wouldn't do that. I'm your son. That's why I'm giving you a chance to explain yourself. Tomorrow, 11 o'clock, in my office. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have another appointment. He stood there, unmoving, looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of fear, anger, and, surprisingly, respect. Mom, I didn't know you were capable of this, he finally said. All my life I'd thought you were just. He paused. Just what, Bryce? I asked quietly. A poor accountant with nothing but pennies to show for it? He flinched, recognizing his words. That's not what I meant to say. No, that's exactly what I meant. And you know what? You were right. I was really just a lowly accountant. But now I'm chairman of the board of the company you work for. And you're going to have to take responsibility for your actions, just like any other employee. Bryce turned around and walked out of the office, slamming the door. I took a deep breath, feeling my hands shake. The confrontation had been hard on me, but I held on. The rest of the day was spent preparing for tomorrow's meeting. I went over all the documents the legal department had prepared, discussed possible scenarios with Edward, and even made a list of questions for Bryce. That evening, I got a call from Nicole. Vivian? It's Nicole. Bryce said you couldn't make it tonight? I completely forgot about the dinner invitation. Yeah, I'm sorry, Nicole. I had a work emergency. I understand. She sounded strained. Maybe some other time? We brought you a wonderful souvenir from Greece. Of course, I replied. Another time. After the conversation, I sat at the window for a long time, looking at the evening bay. Tomorrow, everything would be decided. Tomorrow, Bryce would learn that his actions had consequences and his words had weight. The phone rang again, this time Alan Price. Mrs. Holbrook, sorry for the late call, but I think you should know. Bryce has been in the office all day, deleting files and destroying documents. I backed up everything important, but he's obviously trying to cover his tracks. Thank you, Alan. I wasn't surprised. You were right to keep the copies. Bring them to the meeting tomorrow at 11. As I hung up the phone, I felt strangely calm. Bryce was doing exactly what I'd expected, trying to cover up his transgressions instead of admitting them and apologizing. It only confirmed that my decision was correct. I pulled out the picture of Hugh that I always kept on my bedside table. I hope I'm doing the right thing, I whispered, looking at my husband's smiling face. I hope you would approve. In the morning, I woke up with a clear sense of purpose. I wasn't Bryce's mother today. I was the chairman of the board of Axiom Technologies, and my responsibility was to protect the company from unscrupulous employees, whoever they were. I arrived at the office early to prepare for the upcoming conversation. A folder of social media printouts was already on the desk, pictures of Bryce and Nicole's lavish life paid for with stolen money. Next to it were the auditor's reports, the legal opinion, and a list of questions I was going to ask my son. At 10:50, Edward Harris walked into my office. Are you ready, Vivian? He asked sympathetically. This is not going to be an easy conversation. Ready, I nodded, straightening in my chair. Every mother wants her child to be a good person. Sometimes you have to use harsh measures to do that. At 11 sharp, the secretary announced that Bryce Holbrook had arrived for the meeting. I took a deep breath and said, "Invite him in." Bryce entered the office looking unusually tense. He had aged several years overnight, dark circles under his eyes and wrinkles on his forehead. His suit, which had fit perfectly yesterday, seemed wrinkled today. Good morning, he said, trying to sound confident, but his voice trembled. Morning, Bryce. I nodded at the chair across from me. Have a seat. Edward Harris, standing at the window, tilted his head slightly in greeting, but didn't say a word. His presence made Bryce nervous. I thought we were going to talk privately, my son said without moving. Mr. Harris is the CFO of the company, I replied calmly. Given the nature of the issues we would be discussing, his presence was necessary. Bryce reluctantly lowered himself into the chair. I've been thinking all night, Mom. What you saw in the reports? It does look bad, I admit, but I have an explanation. Just give me a chance to clear things up. I folded my hands on the table. We'll come back to this a little later. First, I'd like to notify you that there will be a general meeting of department heads at 1400. Your attendance is mandatory. A meeting? He frowned. What meeting? I will formally introduce myself to the team as the new chairman of the board, I replied. I'll also announce the results of the audit and further personnel decisions. Bryce turned pale. Personnel decisions? Mom, you can't seriously be thinking about— Mr. Holbrook, Edward interrupted him, stepping away from the window. You're not just talking to your mother, you're talking to the chairman of the board of Axiom Technologies. And yes, the results of the audit will have consequences for all employees found to have engaged in misconduct. Misconduct? Bryce laughed nervously. That's a mouthful. Some procedures may not have been fully followed, but— Bryce, I opened the folder in front of me. We have before us the results of an independent audit. Your department has been systematically overcharging for projects. The difference, about $120,000 over the last year, has been diverted through a shell company called BN Solutions, registered in your wife's name. That's not failure to follow procedures. That's fraud. Bryce's face contorted. That money was used for development. Nicole and I were investing in new technology that could then benefit the company. I was going to pay it all back. Interesting. I pulled out the printouts from social media. Are these pictures from the cruise part of the new technology investment too? A diamond bracelet for Nicole? Dinners at fine dining restaurants? Bryce looked at the photos and pressed his lips together. That's our personal lives. Has nothing to do with work. It is if it's paid for with company money, Edward pointed out. There was a long pause. Bryce looked back and forth at Edward and me, as if searching for a way out of a trap. Okay, he said finally. I admit that I've made mistakes, but you can't just wipe out all the credit I've given to the company. I've brought in big clients, increased the department's revenue by 30% in 2 years. That's true, I agreed. Your achievements will be taken into account in the decision, but the fact remained that you'd abused the company's trust. Bryce leaned forward. Mom, listen, I know what I did was wrong, but we're family. Are you really going to let this story ruin my career, my reputation? Think about Nicole. Think about our future. I looked at my son and saw in him the little boy who always thought he could get away with anything if he was convincing enough to apologize. A boy who maybe I had spoiled too much, protected too much from the consequences of his actions. Bryce, I said softly, I'm thinking about your future. That's why you need to take responsibility for your actions. It'll make you a better man. Better? He almost shouted the word. You're going to ruin my life and you call that caring? No one is going to ruin your life, Edward interjected. This is about professional responsibility. By the way, you're lucky Mrs. Holbrook decided not to involve law enforcement. Bryce turned to him sharply. Who the hell are you, anyway? This is a family matter. No, Bryce, I shook my head. This is a company matter. And Mr. Harris is here because we have to act in accordance with corporate rules and the law. My son leaned back in his chair, looking defeated. What are you going to do? He asked quietly. The results of the audit will be presented at the meeting. The decision regarding the employees who committed violations will also be announced there. I closed the folder. You can go now, Bryce. I'll see you at 14 o'clock. He stood up, still not believing I was really gonna follow through. Mom, please. I'll see you at the meeting, Mr. Holbrook, Edward said, making it clear that the conversation was over. Bryce turned and walked out, slamming the door loudly. Edward turned to me. "You did great, Vivian. I know how hard this is for you." "Thank you." I smiled weakly. "I hope I'm making the right decision." "You're doing what a leader should do?" He nodded. "Eugene would be proud of you." After Edward left, I was alone in my office, preparing for the upcoming meeting. I had to not only announce my appointment, but also present the results of the audit, pointing out any irregularities, and all this under the gaze of dozens of employees, including my own son. At 2:30, I went down to the large conference room on the first floor. It was already filled with people, department heads, their deputies, key specialists. Bryce was sitting in the third row, tense and pale. When I entered, the room was silent. Edward Harris, standing at the podium, nodded at me and began the meeting. "Colleagues, as many of you already know, with the departure of Eugene Quincy, the company has entered a new phase. Today, I am officially introducing you to the new chairman of the board of Axiom Technologies, Vivian Holbrook." A whisper went around the room. Many knew me as an accountant who had been with the company for decades, but few expected to see me in a leadership role. I stepped up to the podium, feeling my heart pounding. Public speaking had never been my strong suit. "Good afternoon," I began, trying to make my voice sound confident. My appointment comes as a surprise to many people. For 30 years, I'd been an accountant for this company, and I'd never sought a management position. But Eugene Quincy, my longtime friend and colleague, had made a different decision. He left me a controlling interest and the position of chairman of the board. I paused, looking at the crowd. Many faces expressed surprise, some skepticism. Bryce's gaze was impenetrable. I accept this responsibility with humility and determination. My goal is to ensure a stable future for Axiom Technologies by maintaining the values that have always been the foundation of our company: honesty, professionalism, and respect for our customers and employees. I took a breath and continued. My first decision was to conduct a comprehensive audit of all departments, not because I don't trust you, but because I wanted to get a complete picture of the state of the company. Mr. Harris will give you the general results of that audit. I gave way to Edward, who began to methodically outline the company's financials, comparing them to last year's. Most of the departments showed stable or growing results, but then he moved on to the problem areas. Unfortunately, the audit revealed serious irregularities in the work of the implementation department, Edward said, displaying graphs and tables on the screen. Systematic overstatement of expenses, fictitious payments, and the use of shell companies to withdraw funds. A surprised murmur spread through the room. All eyes turned to Bryce, who sat with his back straightened and his jaw clenched. "The total amount of the violations is about $120,000 over the last year," Edward continued. "That's a serious violation not only of the company's internal rules, but also of the law." I stepped to the podium again, feeling the stares of everyone present. "As chairman of the board, I cannot ignore these facts," I said firmly. "Honesty and transparency have always been the foundation of Axiom Technologies. Any breach of those principles undermines the trust of our customers and partners, jeopardizes our reputation, and ultimately, the well-being of all of our employees." I looked directly at Bryce. The head of the implementation department, Bryce Holbrook, is suspended from his position pending the outcome of an internal investigation. All department projects will be temporarily placed under the leadership of Alan Price, who has demonstrated a high level of professionalism and commitment to the company's values. Bryce twitched as if from a blow. His face turned purple and his eyes narrowed with anger. But he didn't say a word, realizing that any protest would only make matters worse. "I realize that this decision may seem harsh," I continued, "but it is necessary to preserve the integrity and reputation of our company." Axiom Technologies has always been and will always be a place where integrity, professionalism, and teamwork are valued. I concluded my presentation by announcing several new initiatives to improve internal processes and strengthen controls over financial transactions. Edward then presented an action plan for the coming quarter. When the meeting was over, the employees began to disperse, talking animatedly about what they had heard. Many approached me to express support or ask questions. Bryce disappeared as soon as the formal part was over without saying a word. I returned to my office feeling a strange mixture of tiredness and relief. The hardest part was over. I had publicly stated my position and taken the necessary steps. Now it remained to deal with the personal consequences of that decision. Not an hour later, there was a knock on my office door. I knew who it was before Bryce walked in, angry and red-eyed. "How could you?" he was almost shouting. "Embarrass me in front of the whole company, destroy everything I've accomplished." I stared at him calmly, letting my emotions spill out. "Close the door, Bryce," I said quietly. "We need to talk." He slammed the door shut and walked over to my desk, looming over me. "Talk? What is there to talk about? You betrayed me? Your own son?" "No, Bryce." I shook my head. "You betrayed the company's trust, and my trust. I only took the necessary steps, as any responsible manager should. Any executive?" He laughed bitterly. "Any mother would protect her child. And you made me look like a fraud in front of everyone." I stood up, looking him straight in the eye. "Isn't that right? Didn't you withdraw company money through your wife's shell company? Weren't you cheating clients by inflating costs?" Bryce looked away. "Everyone does it," he muttered. "It's just business." "No, it's fraud," I said firmly. "And you know it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have tried to destroy the documents when you found out about the audit." He slumped back in his chair, suddenly losing all his anger. "What happens now? You're suspended pending an internal investigation. If it turns out to be true, you'll have to return the funds you illegally obtained and possibly leave the company." "Quit?" He looked up at me in shock. "You're firing me?" "That would be a board decision, not my own," I replied. "Duh. But yes, termination is one of the likely outcomes." Bryce covered his face with his hands. "You're gonna ruin my career. Who would hire me after a scandal like that?" "You ruined your own career, Bryce, when you thought you could cheat the company and steal its money." He looked up, a cold calculation in his eyes. "What about Nicole? Have you thought about her? If I get fired, we won't be able to pay for the house, the car. Then you'll have to learn to live within your means," I said calmly, "like I've been doing my whole life. Remember when you used to call me poor? You said I had nothing but pennies, that I never took risks, never lived humanly?" Bryce shuddered, recognizing his words. "I was angry then. I didn't mean to hurt you." "No, Bryce, that's exactly what you meant. You've always been ashamed of me, my job, my lifestyle, my apartment. You thought I was a loser who'd never gotten anywhere in life." I walked around the table and stood in front of him. "Now look where we both are. I'm the chairman of the company, a respected professional, the man Eugene Quincy entrusted with his life's work. And you're a suspended manager, convicted of fraud." Bryce's face contorted with anger and pain. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? My humiliation? Your power over me?" "No, Bryce," I shook my head. "I don't enjoy it. It hurts to see what you've become. It hurts to know that my only son thinks it's okay to steal and lie, that he despises his mother for living an honest life and working hard." I went back to the table and sat down. "Remember when you took my savings for your cruise? How you mocked me by calling me poor? How you posted pictures on social media of a lavish life paid for with my pennies?" Bryce was silent, not looking at me. I gave you that money knowing I'd probably never see it again, because you're my son and I loved you no matter what. But there's a line you can't cross, and you crossed it when you started stealing from the company. I'll pay you back, he muttered. Every cent. Just don't fire me. I sighed. It's not just about the money, Bryce. It's about trust. You abused it, and now you have to face the consequences. What am I supposed to do? He asked, looking suddenly small and lost. First, return all illegally obtained funds. Then, cooperate with the internal investigation, provide all documents and information, and, most importantly, admit your responsibility and apologize to the colleagues you let down. Bryce looked like I suggested he jump off a roof. Apologize? Publicly? Yes, publicly. That's what grown-ups do, Bryce. They admit their mistakes and try to fix them. He stood up looking defeated. I'll think about it. Good, I nodded. In the meantime, turn in all work materials to Alan Price and stay out of the office until the investigation is complete. Bryce headed for the door, but stopped when he grabbed the handle. You know, he said without turning around, I never thought you were capable of this. All my life I thought you were weak and submissive, but you're stronger than all of us. With these words, he walked away, leaving me alone with conflicting feelings. On the one hand, I was proud that I had found the strength to do the right thing. On the other hand, my heart was torn with pain for my son, who had never understood the main lesson I had tried to teach him all my life. Honesty and hard work are more important than external glitter and easy money. I went to the window, looking out at the bay, shimmering in the rays of the pre-sunset sun. For the first time in years, I felt strangely peaceful. I was no longer the woman Bryce could use and humiliate. I was who I'd always been at heart, strong, principled, capable of making the hard decisions. The phone rang. Edward Harris wanted to discuss the details of an upcoming investigation. I turned away from the window and returned to my desk, ready to continue my work. Life had not stopped, and I still had a lot to do as chairman of the board of Axiom Technologies. When I got home that evening, I found a small box on my doorstep, a gift from the cruise that Bryce and Nicole had promised to bring. Inside was a small statue of the goddess Athena, a symbol of wisdom and justice. The irony of this gift didn't escape me. I put the statue on the shelf next to Hugh's picture and stared at them for a long time, thinking about the vicissitudes of fate and how one decision could change a whole life. Eugene's decision to leave me the company, my decision to do the audit, Bryce's decision to pursue fraud. That evening, I wrote a letter to my son, not an email, but a real one, on paper. I told him how I felt, about my frustration and pain, but also about my hope that he would find the strength to change and be a better person, about how no matter what, I would always be his mother and I would always love him, but that I would no longer allow myself to be used or to harm the company I had been entrusted with. Finishing the letter, I sealed it in an envelope, but didn't send it. Perhaps the day would come when Bryce would be ready to read it. In the meantime, I had to learn to live in a new reality, a reality where I was no longer just Bryce's mom or the old accountant, but the chairman of the board, the person who made the important decisions and was responsible for the entire company. That was the price of my independence, and I was willing to pay it. A month flew by. Every day was filled with meetings, decisions, and new responsibilities. I was quickly settling into the role of chairman of the board. Perhaps because my years as an accountant had taught me to see the company as a whole, to understand the interrelationships between departments and processes. The internal investigation into Bryce's activities concluded, confirming all suspicions. The board of directors met to decide on his fate in the company. I deliberately did not attend the vote to avoid a conflict of interest, but I did express my position beforehand. Firing him would be too easy. I told Edward the night before the meeting. Bryce would just find another job and keep acting the same way. I thought he needed a chance to improve, but under strict supervision. Edward agreed, and the board made a decision. Bryce would be demoted to an entry-level position in the implementation department, with a 6-month probationary period and a mandatory weekly report to the new department head. In addition, he was required to return all illegally obtained funds and attend corporate training on business ethics. When Bryce was informed of the decision, he took it with unexpected relief. Apparently, he had expected the worst, a complete dismissal with a wolf ticket. "Thank you," he said to me the next time I saw him, without making eye contact. "I know it's your decision. The board's decision," I corrected him. "I was just stating my opinion." "Still, thank you. I won't let you down." I nodded, keeping my professional distance. It was too early to talk about rebuilding trust, both in business and personal relationships. Nicole took the news of her husband's demotion with unexpected stoicism. She sold her luxury car and gave up several expensive habits. Perhaps it was a sign of maturity I hadn't noticed in her before. "We'll get through this," she told me over the phone. "It's still more than we deserve given the circumstances." I appreciated her pragmatism, but I still wasn't ready for a warm family relationship. The memories of them spending my savings while ridiculing my lifestyle were too fresh. My own life, meanwhile, had changed dramatically. The new position brought not only responsibility, but also a significant increase in income. For the first time in years, I had the luxury of not counting every penny and not denying myself small pleasures. The first thing I did was to update my closet, not for the sake of ostentatious luxury, but to match my new status. Strict but elegant suits, quality shoes, a few good accessories. I had never been vain, but I found that a well-groomed appearance gave extra confidence in business meetings. Then it was the turn of the apartment. I didn't move. Too many memories tied me to the place. Instead, I started renovating. New furniture, modern appliances, fresh wallpaper and curtains. The kitchen was my favorite part of the house, spacious and bright. "Vivian, it's amazing!" my friend Eleanor exclaimed when she saw the new apartment for the first time. "Dash such elegant simplicity. Just like you." Eleanor began to visit me more often. We cooked dinners together, discussed books, sometimes went to the theater or to exhibitions. With her, I could relax and be myself without thinking about corporate strategies and financial reports. My social circle was gradually expanding. I used to be withdrawn, focused on work and taking care of my son. Now I started accepting invitations to business dinners, attending charity events, and meeting new people. At one of these evenings, I met Harlan Sheffield, an economics professor from Stanford, a widower my age, with mild manners and a sharp mind. We got to talking about the latest trends in corporate finance, and the conversation lasted all evening. "You know, Mrs. Holbrook," he said as he walked me to the cab, "I'm holding a seminar on financial ethics for CEOs. I'd love to have you as one of the participants." I agreed, and that was the beginning of our regular communication. First professional, then more personal. We were not in a hurry to name our relationship, but we enjoyed each other's company. There were changes in the office, too. Gradually, my colleagues got used to seeing me, not just as a former accountant, but as a competent manager. It was especially gratifying to receive recognition from those who had barely noticed my existence before. I have to admit, Vivian, I had my doubts about you. The head of the development department, an older man with whom we had worked side by side for many years, once told me, "But your decisions over the months have been precise and measured. Eugene didn't make a mistake in choosing you. It was moments like that that boosted my confidence." I began to express my ideas more openly, without fear of being ridiculed or rejected, and to my surprise, my colleagues listened, even if they didn't always agree. Alan Price, who took over as head of implementation, proved to be a talented manager. Under his leadership, the department had not only rebuilt its reputation, but had attracted several major clients. Bryce is adapting, Alan told me at one of our regular meetings. He works hard, never misses a report. He can be, abrasive, but overall he's doing a good job. I nodded without commenting. Bryce and I kept our relationship formal. We rarely saw each other in the office. Our positions were now at different levels of the hierarchy, and we hardly ever socialized outside of work. This unspoken neutrality suited us both, at least at this point. One evening, while I was working late, there was a knock on my office door. Bryce stood on the doorstep, nervous but determined. "Mom, we need to talk," he said without preamble. I set the papers aside and pointed to the chair across from me. "I'm listening to you." Bryce sat down, rubbing his hands together nervously. "It's been 3 months," he began. "I've been complying with all the demands, returning the money, working like hell. Alan's happy with my work. I think it's time to call it a day." "What's that?" I asked, even though I already knew where he was going with this. "This cold war between us." Bryce leaned forward. "Mom, I realize I screwed up. I admit it. But I'm your son, your family. You can't break off the relationship forever because of one mistake." I looked at him closely. Something had changed in his face over the month's new wrinkles, a less self-assured look. But there was something else that made me wary, some calculating in his eyes. "I didn't break things off, Bryce," I said calmly. "I was just setting boundaries." "What boundaries?" He shook his hands. "You're barely speaking to me. Nicole has asked you out to dinner 3 times in the last month, and you've said no every time." "I had other plans," I said. It was true. My evenings were now often taken up with meetings with Harlan or Eleanor, the watercolor painting course I'd recently started taking, or just the quiet evenings with a book that I'd learned to appreciate. "Other plans," Bryce repeated bitterly. "More important than your own family?" "Bryce," I sighed, "what exactly do you want? For things to go back to the way they were? When you only showed up at my place when you needed something? When you made fun of my job and my lifestyle?" He looked away. "It was wrong. I admit it. But people change. I've changed." "Maybe," I nodded. "And I'm glad you have. But trust isn't rebuilt overnight. I need time to see that these changes are real and deep, not just a temporary strategy to get back in my good graces." Bryce frowned. "You mean you don't believe me? You think I'm faking it?" "I don't, Bryce. And that's the problem. I don't know who I can trust anymore." He sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Okay, I understand that. But can't we at least start small? Sunday lunches, for example?" Nicole had learned how to make a great lasagna. I smiled weakly, remembering how often they'd criticized my cooking in the past. "We'll see, Bryce. I really have a lot on my plate right now." He stood up, obviously disappointed by my answer. "You know, I'm trying to extend an olive branch here. I might not have come at all, considering how you humiliated me." And there it was, the real face behind the mask of remorse. I, too, have risen to my full height. "I didn't humiliate you, Bryce. I just made you face the consequences of your actions. There's a difference." "There's a difference." He raised his voice. "You made me look like a fraud in front of the whole company. You relegated me to a lowly employee. I'm now working for a pittance, reporting to a man who used to work under me." "And whose fault is that?" I asked quietly. Bryce was silent, his face reddening with restrained anger. "I'm trying to work things out," he said finally. "But I can see that you're not interested. You're too busy with your new life, your new friends. That professor of yours." I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "Are you following me?" "Nicole saw you at the restaurant," he mumbled. She said you looked very close. I shook my head, not knowing whether to laugh or be angry. My personal life has nothing to do with this conversation, Bryce. Yes, it did. He raised his voice again. You've made a new man, new friends, a new life, and there's no room for your own son. There's always room for you in my life, I said calmly, but not on the same terms as before. I'm no longer going to be the convenient mother you can use when you need money and ignore the rest of the time. I deserve respect and attention, the same kind you're willing to give your friends, coworkers, or Nicole. Bryce was silent, digesting my words. What are you suggesting? He finally asked. Start from the beginning, I replied. Like two adults respecting each other's boundaries. No manipulation, no pressure, no trying to make the other feel guilty. Sounds complicated, he hummed. Adult relationships are always more complicated than child relationships, I said. But it's also more valuable. Bryce nodded thoughtfully, then held out his hand. Okay, let's give it a shot. How about lunch next Sunday? Just you and me, no Nicole. At that Italian place you like. I looked at his outstretched hand, and after a second's hesitation, I shook it. It's a deal, but not this Sunday. I have plans with Harlan. Maybe next week? Bryce tensed, but held back from commenting. Okay, next week, he agreed. I'll call you to confirm the time. After he left, I stood at the window for a long time, staring out at the evening city. Something told me that our conversation wouldn't change Bryce instantly. He might never completely change, but an important step had been taken. I was no longer afraid to assert my boundaries, no longer felt guilty about living my life. The following weeks brought new challenges and joys. The company was preparing to launch a new product, and I spent a lot of time in meetings with developers and marketers. Harlan invited me to accompany him to a conference in New York, and I accepted, my first trip outside of California in many years. Before leaving, I stopped by the office to sign some documents. I ran into Bryce in the lobby. He looked tired but focused. Leaving? He asked, noticing my traveling suit. To New York for 3 days, I replied. A conference on corporate governance. With a professor? There was a note of sarcasm in his voice. Yes, with Harlan, I said, not shying away from the answer. He's giving a presentation, and I'm representing our company. Bryce nodded, clearly trying to hold back the sarcastic comment. Well, have a good trip. Thanks, I smiled. How are you doing? I'm okay, he shrugged. Alan gave me a new project. It's small, but it's independent. The first one since, that's good. I was genuinely happy for him. It means he's seeing progress. I guess so, Bryce said quietly. Hey, listen, about lunch on Sunday. Why don't we reschedule? It's Nicole's birthday, so we're planning a small dinner. Sure, I agreed easily. Tell her congratulations. Why don't you tell her yourself? He suddenly suggested it. Come to dinner. Only the closest people will be there. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to refuse. The old resentments had not yet been completely forgotten. But the other part of me realized that this was a chance to start building a new, healthier relationship. Okay, I nodded. When I got back from New York, I'd check the charts. Bryce's face brightened. Great. Nicole will be thrilled. Thanks, Mom. For what? For the second chance. Not just at work, but, family. I smiled, feeling the ice that had held my heart together for so long melt away. Everyone deserves a second chance, Bryce. But remember, there may not be a third. He nodded, realizing the seriousness of my words. I won't let you down, not ever again. We parted ways. He toward the elevators leading to the offices, me toward the exit, where a cab was waiting for me. Halfway there, I stopped and turned around. Bryce, he turned around too. Yeah? I'm proud of the way you handle adversity. It takes strength of character. His face softened, something in his eyes that reminded me of a little boy I once knew. Thank you, Mom. That means a lot. I walked out of the building with a light heart. The future of my relationship with Bryce was still uncertain. Maybe we'd never really get close. Maybe he would disappoint me again. But now I knew I could handle it, not as a helpless, dependent mother, but as a strong, self-sufficient woman who valued herself and didn't let others overstep their boundaries. The cab pulled away, taking me to the airport, and from there to New York, to new experiences and opportunities. I stared out the window at Foster City, a city I'd known all my adult life, but which I now saw with new eyes. Through the eyes of a woman who had finally found her power and her place in the world. The phone in her bag vibrated a message from Harlan. "Don't forget warm clothes. It's chilly in New York. I'm looking forward to seeing you." I smiled and replied, "On my way, looking forward to seeing you too." There was a long flight ahead, a busy conference, and possibly the beginning of something new in my personal life. But no matter what happened, I knew one thing. No one else would ever make me feel unworthy or small again. No more would anyone tell me that I was poor and had nothing but pennies to take from me. Because real wealth isn't about money or status. It's in self-respect, in the ability to stand your ground and live by your own rules. And I had plenty of that wealth now.